This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with artist Joel Mesler about his artistic journey, his decades as an art dealer, his late blossoming art career, and his current exhibit, Pool Party, which is on exhibit through March 15th at Leve Gorvy's galleries in both London and Palm Beach. And now my conversation with Joel Mesler. Joel Mesler, thank you so much for joining me today on the Art Sense podcast. Joel, a lot of times when I talk to artists, I like to start with a hypothetical, which is you're at a dinner party and you're seated next to somebody who has no idea who you are or what you do. How do you describe to them what you do?
Yeah, great first question. And I think this is probably the toughest question. Well, it's the first question, so it's the only question. So it's obviously the toughest question. But I guess I would say, you know, the story of Fiddler on the Roof?
Mm-hmm.
My paintings are kind of like that story. Like I guess all the highs and the lows and the journey of that. And I kind of tend to think of myself as like making little moments of Tevia's story a little bit.
Is it reflecting your own personal journey?
Yeah, I think that I have mined my own story because it's as you said earlier, it's what I know most of, and I'm not 100% confident I know much about anything else. The older I get, I realize I know absolutely nothing, but I kind of, I have this life lived of experiences, and so I kind of mind that, and I've kind of, from that have connected with other stories and kind of metaphors and analogies, and so I it's definitely like my work is, it's a story of like my trauma and all, the history and experience. But I think in it, there's sort of like a moment of awe, like the awe of life, and the gratitude of life that comes that, you realize like you're just a vessel at some point, and you kind of like, I think I really connect to that story of Tevye a little bit, where you just kind of like put your hands up and you're like, the life.
Right. It's funny, I talk with artists all the time and again, it's obvious that the best work is really personal and rooted in where they're from. It's like geographic, right? And so when I saw your alphabet paintings, my memory, my first thought goes to me having breakfast at the Polo Lounge at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And, right. And I'm just wondering, you're from Beverly Hills. Was that a conscious decision? Were you mining something from your family, either consciously or subconsciously?
So, my parents, we lived in Beverly Hills, 600 block. My mom was always very proud to say, and as I was growing up, I think the like north of Sunset, south of Sunset kind of class system in Beverly Hills was, how big was your pool kind of conversation was omnipresent. And my parents, my father was a cardiologist with a real bad cocaine problem, and my mother had a desire of, I think not being just a soccer mom, and so their marriage didn't work out. And I think as things kind of fell apart, my parents' divorce kind of like, well, it did actually changed California law. They actually study it in divorce law, but it it changed kind of the course of, my, obviously, my family's life and my brother and my life. And the Beverly Hills Hotel was this place that, we'd go there for brunch, like you said, at the Polo Lounge and stuff like that. But my father had, there was a couple of years where he had several nervous breakdowns in public. And the first one that I remember was actually at the Polo Lounge. And I remember him like picking up the table and like eggs Benedict like falling down like, the table and falling into my mother's lap, and him like getting up from the table, and kind of the scene, and everybody around like staring at us, and my mother, him running out, and my mother saying like, follow your father. And so, I'm like 11 years old and I'm following my father, and I remember the banana leaves of the wallpaper of the hotel. And I remember kind of like grinding my nails, digging them so deeply into the walls of the wallpaper that they like grinded into my cuticles, and so this kind of, as I've gotten older, like that wallpaper kind of always meant something very different to me than it did, obviously, had I not had that experience. And so, as I started making work again, as like this kind of older person, as a father, and, as somebody having hopefully dealt a little bit with my trauma, I look back at this time, and it, like this image of the wallpaper and this opulence and this luxury and this beauty, to me, underneath it holds this other kind of like sub story, and so I was able to kind of use that wallpaper as like this kind of like a sub story a little bit. And so I was able to kind of like find lots of meaning and almost like, to be honest, therapeutic, just kind of spending my time like thinking about that stuff, and making some shekels along the way. And so, I think that was the impetus of the wallpaper, is like it's kind of like multi-layered elements like that. And so it was, I mean, to answer your question, like a long-winded answer, but like it was very conscious to use that. And I think I've not only used that, but I've also kind of located other images and things like that represent or have been those kind of things throughout my life, where perhaps they can represent one thing, but also it's like almost an inside joke to yourself, like, oh, actually they mean this.
What other examples would you have in mind? Like,
I mean, to keep kind of like on that same, like timeline, I almost say like, all my art for a while was like based on like this, the same few hours of my life. But when I was young, around the same time, there was a store called Huddle, and my parents, or my mother, my wallpaper in my bedroom and the furniture, the bookcases, the pillow spreads, the bed sheets, everything had the same like rainbow and like kind of faux car wheels and stuff like that. And they sold it at the store, in town. And not only did my brother and I have this, but every single other kid in my school and in the neighborhood had the same stuff. And so you would like have a sleepover at friends, and you're like, oh my God, I'm in my room still. And you'd go to another friend's, and they're like, same thing. You could not escape this wallpaper. And so, I've used kind of like these rainbows throughout my paintings, and it's like this, like, it could represent so many things. And to me, it's sort of like, it's like running from the rainbow.
That's interesting. It's funny you said that. I heard, I listened to a conversation that you had about your journey, and I believe Rainbow was the name of one of the people you ran into up in Sonoma State.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe I'm substituting some other hippie name, but it sounded like
I was very close with. I had a friend Rainbow, and then I had a friend Summer and Tangerine. And Tangerine used to make me tea when I got sick, and we would make like a wormwood absinthe too. She was quite the healer.
I think it's worth just trying to quickly go through your timeline because, like, it's so unique. You start in Beverly Hills, but because of the historic divorce case and everything around that, you wind up going from one class level to the next and living out teenage debauchery, and then go on the move, kind of pulled by art. You leave LA to go to college at Sonoma State, and then how do things progress?
So I actually went to Sonoma State because I was planning on staying in Los Angeles and kind of selling ecstasy and quaaludes, but my I had big plans as a 17-year-old, and all my friends were going away to college, like Hampshire, and I went to school, nice liberal school, and I came home crying to my mother, 17-year-old kid, probably strung out on mushrooms or whatever. And I was like, Mom, Seth is going away to college and Matt's gone. And she goes, well, darling, I applied to Sonoma State University for you and you got accepted. And I couldn't believe it. My best friend from the year before, Dave Lake, had gone to Sonoma State and he loved it. And so my mom thought, well, that's the place. I'm going to apply for Joel because I know Joel better than Joel knows Joel. And she wrote my essay for me, and they loved my essay, and they accepted me, and I got in. And the major she put down for me was psychology. And I knew nothing about psychology, or, I didn't even know what, a psychologist was at this point. And yet it was my major. And I thanked her. I think I was appreciative for maybe all of, 2 hours. And I packed my car and I drove up to Sonoma, and I started taking psychology classes where I actually kind of loved reading about psychology. Um, and I just slowly, from being in college, and I think kind of, being kind of outside of outside of Los Angeles and outside of my family and all the mishigas that kind of I think I was, susceptible to and all that, I kind of started to find a voice a little bit, and I took sculpture classes, and I was welding, and I got a job at a foundry, and, I think I just kind of found my voice. I took a peace studies class, and I remember a book called Way of the Peaceful Warrior, and, just my world got rocked. And I started taking art classes, and I loved, hanging out and drinking vodka late at night and welding and painting and doing all that. And I think that I just kind of organically like fell into this scene, where I was just with a bunch of kind of like weirdo hippie artists making stuff. And I think that, I got a lot of support and inspiration from teachers. There was a teacher there. He's still there. His name is Kurt Kemp, and he was a student of Lazansky, and he was really inspiring to me. And from there, I went to San Francisco Art Institute. They pushed me to keep pursuing the art. And at this point, I had no real plans. It was life was going better than it had ever been, and so I just I kept doing it, and people kept seemed to keep being kind of like supporting me, and it was hitting something. I felt like I was kind of in the flow of life, and I remember I graduated from San Francisco, and it was like okay, like, what do we do now? And, a couple of my friends were getting shows in, like, gallery, like the Paula England Gallery, and, like, things were happening for them. And I was like, okay, I was kind of waiting around, like, looking over my shoulder, like, okay, well, what's for me? And, I just did my thing. And, for me, it was like kind of like just whispers, like nothing happened, and so I kind of like sat around, like just kind of wondering where all of my, hard work was going to pay off, when it was going to pay off. And nothing happened. And so I moved back to Los Angeles, like any good, mama's boy would do. And I realized that, I had to make some shekels, and nobody wanted my paintings. And so I opened up a gallery. And the finances, I could get into that, but I essentially lived in the basement of the gallery, and I did my finances in a way that, literally, like the first time I sold a piece for $300, it was like a celebration. And I was in Chinatown, Los Angeles, and things were very inexpensive back in those days. And I literally just kind of fell into being an art dealer, and I stopped painting, and I just kind of assumed that, this is who and what I was going to do with my life. And I was, I don't want to say I was good at it, but like I enjoyed doing it. And I, again, I didn't really have a choice. Like I had no other skills. So I kind of knew the language of art. So I sold art. I sold other people's art.
Well, whenever I read about you or hear other people talk about you, it seems like this one word keeps on coming up over and over, and that Joel is a hustler. What do you think people are saying when they refer to you as a hustler?
Well, I think that when you don't get kind of professional training, like I didn't do it in, like, you had made reference to it before. I didn't take the correct steps. I didn't take the steps to, I didn't work in a gallery before I opened a gallery. I knew nothing. I had no idea what I was doing before I was doing it. I learned how to make money by, it was need. I was selling drugs in high school to survive. Like my mom had no money to give me for lunch, and so I Xerox like the food cards and would sell them at 50 cents on the dollar. And it's like, and I
your life sounds like a hip hop song, right?
Yeah, the mean streets of Beverly Hills. But I think that I kind of, I applied maybe some of those same principles to selling art. And I think that maybe more of the traditional structure, it's not maybe celebrated. Usually the art world doesn't celebrate things or people until they become successful, and it's quite easy to criticize things that are maybe outside of the box a little bit until it becomes successful. And so I think, like, it's like maybe I was, doing things a little wrong. I remember when, there was a very successful gallery down the block, China Art Objects, and I remember Jeffrey Deitch used to come and visit them all the time, and I would always think like, and I would always know, when Jeffrey was on the block, and I would always think like, how would I get Jeffrey into my gallery, and so it's like those kind of strategies, instead of like, it was sort of like, there's always an angle and there's always a play. But I think the hustler is, it's just like, you got no other choice, it's like, if I'm art dealing, I'm going to try to be the best art dealer I can with the tools I have, I guess, even though I don't really have all the tools, I guess.
And maybe you could talk about this. Like my sense is that you're really good at it. And if you're a small art dealer that's really good at your job, you're constantly having to find new talent. You're finding the talent that's going to get taken away by the bigger gallery, right? I mean, so it's kind of paradoxical. Like, the better you are, the harder you work, the more things kind of slip through your fingers. I mean, would you agree? I mean, is that something that...
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, in a certain respect, I think the honesty I had about my position and place and tier within the art system, I think actually really helped me. I think that what I have seen is, and I think this is, true throughout life, but when people try to hold on to things too tightly, and, when there's fear of losing something, a lot of times like that loss comes on quicker than if, you can learn to let go a little bit and kind of let go and let God a little bit. And I think that, I was in a situation where I was incredibly close with my artists, in a way where I knew that, there would be a time when, like you said, their successes would mean my eventual, they would eventually be leaving me. Their successes would be, my successes, but would not mean, me coming along for their, financial gains in the future. And I had to take pride in that, as opposed to kind of like concentrating on the like half empty kind of position of it all. Um, and so I think that by understanding that position and trying to really be in that place and not hold tight and say like, well, you can never leave me. Like, I knew that they were going to leave me, and I wanted them, and so I kind of like, I throughout the journey, I was kind of I tried to, embrace that a little bit, and I think that helped me, and I think it helped my relationships, and I think it helped me not hold anger and resentment, and I think it also gave me certain advantages, or gave me certain, let's say, like, it allowed me to make certain decisions for my future. So instead of, me just selling work, I bought some of the work myself. So, I wasn't, when they left to bigger galleries, I wasn't like, oh my God, I'll never see a dollar, because, I had a couple nice pieces. So, everyone wins.
So, there's a point where you are 95% art dealer, 5% artist, and that ratio gets flipped around at some point. Was there a particular moment, a catharsis, that led you to have this late bloom?
Well, I kind of, yeah, it's funny. I was actually just recently with my bookkeeper, and I have two LLCs, and one is for my art dealing, my gallery, rental gallery, and I have another one that's for my painting. And it's funny because if you think of it like a scale, literally, like you can watch it, if you as like a numbers person, a data person, you literally could see the scale kind of shifting over the past few years, just from a numbers point of view. But it's funny because I remember, like, I would, I was doing secretly drawings in the back and would sell them for a couple $100, and doing this, and I was so much happier doing that. And I would say to my wife, like, ooh, do you think I could take this more seriously? And she's like, no, go to work, and okay. And then, I got a show in Montauk, and I think I sold 3 paintings at $6,000, and I made, almost 10 grand. I was like, Sarah, she's my wife, and I said, you think I could start to take this a little more seriously? She's like, no, like that, that's not enough money for us. Keep going to work, And then I got this big show, at Simon Lee Gallery in London, and they were going to fly me out. And, I sold some paintings, and I think the paintings now were maybe $12,000. And I was like, and what about now? Like, now he's a real gallery. Like, and she's like, no, absolutely not. Like, this isn't even close to what we, this is good. I'm happy, and you're happy, and this is great. We're doing great, but no, you need to keep your day job, And then as soon as David Kordansky offered me the show, and I knew that was really going to happen, and that there was sort of a shift that happened, and it wasn't just like a psychological shift or a financial shift, but it was like, oh, this is actually could be a thing. Like this is, I might actually be able to be an artist now. Like this actually might, like it was like a smoke signal of like, oh wait, am I gonna get a chance to be an artist now? Like, and I kind of like, I didn't ask Sarah yet, but in the back of my head, I was like, this actually might be the beginning of when she's gonna allow me to quit my day job, And I feel like there was like the shift was right around then. The smoke signals were there for sure.
You went from Los Angeles to New York, all the way from the Pacific to the furthest part of the Atlantic. Now you're in East Hampton, and basically, rental gallery. My understanding is that the majority of the year it serves as your studio, but in the season when the money shows up, you're able to use it as a gallery, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was that like when I did the show with Simon, and that was kind of the moment where this situation, this gallery was like a perfect, the equilibrium, like the percentages were starting to change a little bit, but I was still like, I still had my day job where, I got I used the gallery as my studio in the off season. And then, pretty much, I needed a month of prep time to prep the gallery. And, I started opening shows, at the end of May. And so, I got the studio for probably 7 months out of the year, and the rest of the time it was a gallery. And so during this time, it was still an active gallery. And it wasn't until this past year that this past summer that it was the first time I was closed. I put a sign on the door that said, sorry, rental galleries closed this summer. And that I painted throughout the summer and used the whole space as my studio.
So in terms of percentages, and we were talking about 95.5, what do you think that balance is now of Joel the art dealer versus Joel the artist? I mean, have you convinced your wife that you're at the point where you're closer to 100, or are you in 90% artist?
So now I am 100%, and I can tell you the exact moment that percentage became 100. I had a group show, and a friend of mine, amazing painter Austin Wiener, had a painting in the show, and I had sold the painting, and this really great collector reached out for the painting, and I was like, oh, it's sold, but it's a great collection, it's a public collection. And so I let her know, and I said, look, this would be great for you if this person acquired your work, and so she agreed, and blah blah blah. And so when she had made a work for this collector, she said, okay, like it was time for me to send the invoice and everything like that. And I said, you know what? I'm not sending the invoice. You could send the invoice. And so I put them in touch, and I said, this is for you. And I literally stepped aside from it. And it was that moment, that I said, like, I'm not an art dealer anymore. I literally, it's like, the biggest faux pas of the art dealer. I literally I said goodbye to that deal. I didn't send the invoice. So that was the moment, I was like, okay, it's 100% zero. And,
Did that feel liberating? I mean, all those years that you were an art dealer, were you always thinking in the back of your head that that's really what you wanted to do? That's really what you wanted to be? Or, did life just change and you just welcomed that opportunity? I mean, was it reaching a goal, or was it?
I mean, if you would have asked me that question at different points in my life, I might have given different answers depending on kind of my either levels of intoxication. I mean, I'm 6 years sober now, so I speak quite freely about levels of intoxication, but or just maybe like my ego or whatever it is. But I always wanted to be an artist, and I always thought of myself as an artist. I just knew that I wasn't. There were times in my life that A, I wasn't good enough, or B, I wasn't. I had nothing to give. Like, I think when I was younger and I was making work, I thought of myself as like a Jewish expressionist, and I wanted the world to know the ills and the trauma of my life, and I was gonna show everybody what it felt like. And I think that there was no market for that or me, and there's a reason for it, because there's enough Michigas in the world. Like, who needs my stuff hanging on their wall? And I think it wasn't until I kind of grew up a little bit and realized that, like, oh no, my work can actually be one of like service and making people kind of happy and like giving instead of taking, and showing instead of telling, that all of a sudden I think people started to respond a little bit to what I was doing. And I think that now I'm in a place where, I'm like, okay, now I can be an artist, because I actually am in a place where I feel comfortable with what I'm saying, as opposed to before, like, whatever, I can mix color, and I still knew composition, and I knew all that stuff, but I don't know if I had a reason to be loved, or to be, coveted or purchased or whatever. And so I think I still wanted to be an artist my whole life, but I'm just not sure I was worthy of it.
Yours is the road less traveled to find success in the art world in your late 40s. The model these days seems to be trying to find that rookie talent out of the MFA program. Was there any particular pushback to the fact that you were an early career artist at a later point in your life?
I think there was less of a pushback on that than there was a pushback on that I was an art dealer for so long, and that I had established so many relationships within the art world as an art dealer. I think that that was a bigger pushback. I think that, like, artists like Scott Kahn, and I think that the story of kind of the artists finding their voice or maybe getting rediscovered later in life has been a theme recently. But I think that the art dealer kind of being taken seriously as an artist is maybe a little more taboo. And that was, for me, was a harder kind of nut to crack, I would say. And still, I think it still affects me. I think that, especially in my little circles that I ran in as an art dealer, it's still harder. But I think that, that's why having done a show in Hong Kong with Levy Gorby, like, was so kind of freeing for me. It's because, like, I knew nobody in Hong Kong as an art dealer. Like, I didn't have any collectors in Hong Kong as an art dealer. And so I kind of felt like I was going in there really raw, like, as an artist. And that actually really was freeing for me in terms of, like, making work in the studio, because I felt like there were no kind of, like, shadow voices a little bit where, when I was making a show in LA, I was like, oh boy, this person and this person and this person, all these people that knew me as an art dealer will see, this. And, so it was really nice to have that kind of freedom in Hong Kong. And I was like, oh, this is how other people must feel. Like, this is how other artists must feel, like, when they do a show. Like, they're not walking in a room full of, like, like, all this baggage.
So one of my recent guests was a person named Debbie Millman, and she's a designer, brand guru, arts podcaster, and a huge art collector. And the majority of her collection is really heavy in text. I mean, Lawrence Weiner, Jenny Holzer, Barbara Kruger, Ed Ruscha. And when I look at your new work, Pool Party, it seems to kind of fit with all those names. So my question for you is, tell me about the power of words and why do they feature so prominently in this new body of work?
I would say, I think the words started to come into the work as literally kind of a shortcut to communication for me. I think it really was just how can I, because I was a little older coming to it, it was like, how much time do I got? If people are going to actually take me seriously, how much time? I don't have that much time to kind of like, uh, you know, sing my poetry here. So it was like, how quickly can I say what I need to say? And I think that having found that voice, and the irony of it all is that I am super, super dyslexic. I have like crazy like reading issues. And so a lot of times I will do studies and stuff and I'll take a picture of it or something and send it to my wife. She'll be like, yeah, that's not how you spell sweet, or like what, and which is amazing. And there have been times I've actually like not done that and gotten very far into painting and then gotten to like, oh, Joel, I hate to do this, but like you spelled that word wrong. But uh, I think it's just like this, I get to play with like now I've aestheticized the words and now now I'm playing with this text right now actually where it says Freudian slip and it's I'm painting the honey. It's like it looks like dripping honey, and it's like I get to kind of like visualize the text and see the text and like all the ways to write the letters. And I think that I just get to, it's like I get to do so much with it and I'm having like a blast with it. And I wouldn't even, it's almost now, it's like, I've built that language up for myself now that it's like I wouldn't even know how to, I wouldn't even want to make a picture without it. It's like a color to me.
So does the text always kind of match the visual, or do you use like some cognitive dissonance in there? There's conflict in the visual versus the text.
I mean, I think there's always a dialogue and an acknowledgement of it for sure. Like it would never be, I think, I've often thought about like, Ruscha in that way. Like Ruscha is like a cool cowboy from Oklahoma, where like a lot of times you might very intentionally, like you will see text that is totally disconnected with the visual. And I think that that's part of the charm of his work and why he is so great, but it's a totally different thing. And I think for me, it's not that at all. I think they're very much hand in hand. And whether it's like something of a supporting structure for it, or it is, to point out maybe it's opposite or part of the story. But it's always acknowledged for sure. But it doesn't have to be, no rules.
It is interesting you're talking about the dyslexia, and I've listened to conversations with Richard Branson, and he talks about his dyslexia. He's somebody else that has always been identified as being a hustler. And, he talks about how his journey from, schlepping up to being a billionaire, it's almost like the dyslexia gave him an advantage because he was processing information differently. And, it's interesting because, you hear about left-handed people have better spatial intelligence because they're always having to compensate for living in a right-handed world. And so I just I just wonder, looking back, do you feel like the dyslexia actually? I'm sure your family story was part of the hustler mentality, but do you feel like the dyslexia was also part of what contributed to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all contributed to it. I think definitely like when I was being sent in the hall like daily in fifth grade, like. Today I would say like this is who I am and I wouldn't trade anything and like this is the fabric of my but like if you would have asked the fifth grade self who was like feeling shamed and, like, no, I, wouldn't want to wish that upon anybody, but I think that, when one has to deal with struggles, I've often recently been thinking of, Viktor Frankl's like Man's Search for Meaning. It's like, how do we find, meaning in literally in a place of, where there is no conceivable meaning, like, I think that, once we are set up for challenges and can prevail, God, life is beautiful. But I think at the moment or the time, it's not something you'd wish upon anybody, especially your young self. But yeah, I mean, I think all those challenges contributed to how I see things, and I love how I see things now. But again, I think if you would ask my younger self some of these questions at the time, I'd be like, fuck no, like, let me be normal. Like, I hate this,
Right.
Like, yeah, I want to be just like Charlie, who can read a book.
Right. So what's on the horizon for you? I mean, do you think your work's going to continue to get bigger? Are words going to continue to play a bigger part? Where do you feel like your body of work is headed?
Yeah, I definitely, text, just knowing, what I'm working on now, definitely like text is integral to it. I am going to be doing an exhibition at the Long Museum this summer in Shanghai, and I am doing a series, a new body of work for that show, which is all, heavily text-based, and I'm kind of using, I'm using camouflage, and to kind of like camouflage and work, the text and the image, like kind of like where is the foreground and where's the background, and what is the subject matter, and so I'm super like into what these paintings are, and so one day at a time, and kind of doing these, and future, who the fuck knows,
Right. And so, but right now people can see your work at Leve Gorve in London and Palm Beach, I think through the middle of March.
Yeah.
So if folks wanted to keep track of you and your work, where would they go? I mean, is there Instagram or
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty like obsessed with Instagram. I love Instagram. I tend to like, Instagram my children quite a bit, and like weird, situations I create in the studio. And pretty much like there, and I show with David Cordancy in LA, and I show with Leve Gorve, and yeah, I pretty much like, I'm on Instagram all the time, and I'm doing the show at Long Museum in July, and I don't know, I'm around.
Right on. Well, Joel,
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time. That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to Art Sense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe, and while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. If you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read a transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to cambia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@cambia.art. Thanks for listening.